Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so this is another follow-up on the Joseph Emerson, the Alaska captain who had a meltdown on a Horizon flight from the Seattle area to SFO, San Francisco. Um, and just some thoughts. Basically, I think we understand basically the legal situation. He's not going to get actually convicted of attempted murder. Okay, it'll end up pleading out, or it'll end up resolving at a much lesser charge. And even the federal, I don't see any big exposure. So, I don't think the big problem here is necessarily his legal situation. I think probably more serious for him is his future career. What's going to happen with his future, and also, let's say, his family. Okay. But what I wanted to focus on in this video is kind of my reaction to seeing his wife for the first time, and apparently a slight, tiny comment she had to the press. Um, and I was kind of struck by it. I don't know if I want to overinterpret it, but it sort of raises a question for me. And the issue I want to talk about here is, I think it's clear this guy had a psychotic breakdown. Okay, I think the magic mushrooms were just one trigger among many, many factors that were leading to some kind of breakdown. And I think that subconsciously, even when people have problems with drugs or problems with mental or stress or whatever, sometimes they almost seek a dramatic event to sort of I don't know, sort of to bring attention to their problem, and also to sort of pull the trigger to get them into a better, sort of get them into treatment. I don't know why, but sometimes people, they almost seek like a dramatic way to get themselves, like, get the help they need. Um, so I'm going to go ahead and interpret this as a combination of. I'm not going to look at this as just purely a psychedelic mushroom situation. To me, this is more just a lot of things leading up to this pilot essentially crying for help. Okay, basically. I mean, it's very awkward the way he did it, but and dangerous. I mean, yeah, it is dangerous, and I respect that. But I think in the end, he was just crying for help, and I think this is a desperate man. Okay, a desperate man. So when I saw the interview with his wife, okay, I had a few thoughts, and I could be wrong about all this, but um, I'll basically read what I heard that the wife said to reporters. Basically, she didn't have much to say, but she just said that this is not my Joe. Okay, what happened here is not my Joe. Joe. His name is Joseph. Um, Basically said that he, let's see, this is not the man that I married. Okay, that's an interesting way to phrase it. That's an interesting way to phrase it. And I think, I'm going to take that seriously. Basically, it shows that the wife has a standard, okay, and that what she saw here was not just below her standard, but this behavior was something that she doesn't even recognize as being him. So she imposes on this husband sort of an idea of who he is, okay, and she doesn't apparently allow for, or apparently, maybe I'm overinterpreting the way she said it, but it could be interpreted that she doesn't really allow this great husband that she has, let's say, to have, let's say, a weak moment where he maybe would act less than the standard that she holds for him. Okay, so basically, I mean, it's nice to hold a standard for people, but I think also in humanity, I think we also have to reserve a place that even the most wonderful people can have a very, very bad situation and maybe end up acting in ways that are not really in character. But that doesn't mean that it's not that person. So, I think other people could have said it a different way, where they could say that, yes, I know it's ugly, but my husband is a human being. Okay. And normally my husband's a wonderful person. Okay. But he's had a really hard time. And I guess I underestimated as his wife, I underestimated how bad it was. And unfortunately, when people, carry on or they try to sort of they sort of try to carry on with a deep depression or a deep disturbance. And if it gets bad enough, this is the ugly that it can be sometimes, but that's still my husband. um, she didn't say it that way. That I'm not going to overanalyze. Maybe she just hasn't had time to reflect on it, or maybe she just didn't choose her words very artfully. Maybe she really meant to say that is my husband, but he's just whatever. But I still think that I can't ignore the fact that his wife certainly holds this standard for her husband, where she won't even recognize if he behaves a certain way that's not up to that standard. Okay. And I think that another wife could easily say that, look, I know this is ugly as hell, but that's still a human being. Apparently, he's been crying out for help. Apparently, I underestimated. Okay, and as we know, human beings at their worst can be it can be very ugly, But that's still my husband. That's a human being, and I think we need to see this as a person crying out for help. That's another way to say it, where you're not disavowing his existence and saying that's not even my husband. You know what I mean? So I mean, that kind of, to me, that kind of sharp expectation and that lack of flexibility to sort of accept him on a bad day or accept him in an ugly moment, it suggests that maybe she's a person that holds very high standards. Okay, and so I mean, it's not a big deal. A lot of us hold high standards. I probably do it with my children and with people in my family as well. But hey, it is something that we do as people. We hold people to high standards, and maybe we could be all more flexible to understand that anybody, in their worst moment, under too much pressure, sometimes terrible things can come out, and we need to accept that also as being human. And that's not to say that it's not them. Anyway, I don't want to over interpret, because maybe she agrees with me, so I'm going to leave that soft. It's a soft interpretation. But basically, she just kept repeating. She said, this is not the man that I married, and I don't know how to explain it, but it just wasn't him. Okay, I get that. But you know I'm going to go ahead and speculate a little bit, and I'm going to, because I accept that he had a nervous breakdown. Okay, it's clear to me this is not just a magic mushroom trip. This is a nervous breakdown. This is a mental breakdown. Okay, this is a guy who had depression, ongoing depression, probably much more serious than what he was letting on. I think his wife, I think, told reporters that, yes, I know he was depressed. Okay, well, that's interesting. The wife knew he's depressed. Okay, and the wife knew that he had a job, he had a life-threatening job where he held people's lives in his hand as an airline captain. Okay, so I'm going to put it all together. I think there is a narcissistic angle to this. Okay, and I don't mean that anybody here has the disorder of narcissism. Okay, but what I'm saying is, I think there is a narcissistic structure here to the, let's say, the economic situation of this family. Okay, and just the realities of being a young family, where I looked it up. I looked up this guy's address, because I'm able to, look up pilots and see what address they have. And I verified his address, and I verified his house is worth about $1.2 million. Okay, that's a lot of house for an airline pilot. I mean, airline pilots can make $200,000 a year. He was probably making that, 200 something, whatever. That's probably, pretty standard. But to maintain a $1.2 million house in Northern California, it's not just the house that's expensive. They've got all kinds of other expenses. 2 children, right? And I'm not saying it's a big deal, but, and a lot of people live in California, a lot of pilots, but, that's a lot of life. That's a lot of pressure, and not every penny that he makes in $200,000, he's got to pay his taxes too, right? Um, and so, let's just say that young people, even though they may be making money, they've got mortgages, they've got expensive houses, they've got all, who knows what, the lifestyle basically of being a successful person. And, the wife suggests indirectly in what she's saying that she holds very high standards for her husband, so basically, people should be able to live with high standards. That shouldn't break a person. But let's just say that, you have a person, this young captain, who's at an age like in his mid 40s, where he's kind of at that point where he starts to see a friend die. One of his best friends died. And also you start to feel like you're not young anymore. You're in the range of, let's say, a midlife crisis, right? And in the midst of all this, the COVID comes, apparently he was depressed even before COVID, because he admits 6 years now. It's not just 6 months. But, he had a friend that died. He's now starting to see that he's not young anymore. And yet at the same time, his wife, like a lot of wives, it holds a very high standard for him, and I think, living up to the high standard and knowing that you have, an expensive house, you got children, and, some people can handle that. And for other people, that can be a lot to bear, because you feel like you have to sort of live up to and perform, so it's not just loving to fly airplanes, because, he loved to fly, I'm sure. But it wasn't just that he loved to fly. This guy had to constantly be living up to a standard, and also economically, really living up to the pressures of, maintaining an expensive house in California. My understanding is that he was not from California, and that neither was his wife from California. These guys are from, I think, Washington State, and so they're living in a very expensive part of the country. Um, and so, I have to see that, I think economically and in terms of lifestyle, that does raise a little narcissistic angle, only because, the way I look at narcissism, basically, you can look at it as just a disorder, somebody who's egotistical, who's arrogant, who, doesn't really think much about other people. Okay, yeah, that's fine. But another way to look at narcissism is to have a confusion between who you are really as a person versus the ideal of how a person should be. Okay, that's a more abstract way of looking at narcissism, where you have confusion, or you have trouble holding the dissonance, the difference, and the friction between what a person really is, okay, as imperfect as they are, as short of ideal as they are, versus the ideals that we hold for people. Okay, and the comments from Joseph Emerson's wife suggest that she might be a little more on the spectrum towards seeing her husband not as just a person, just how he is, just as he is, but sort of seeing him sort of as an ideal person. I mean, if I'm wrong about this, I'm wrong. I'm just saying it's something to look at, right? It could be an interpretation, and this wouldn't be the only family. There's probably lots of families out there. Let's say the wife of a surgeon, the wife of a dentist, the wife of a successful attorney, and they sort of married that person thinking that he's a superstar. This guy will not let me down, and a lot of women come from families where maybe their father was a superstar. You can't help it, right? Some people are daughters of superstar fathers who are super successful. They never had a bad day. They maybe are just like beyond, above and beyond, and better than other people, and they might just assume that every man is exactly like their father. You never know. So maybe Joseph's wife had a father who was like this exceptional whatever. But the fact is that we're not all created equal. Some of us, even though we may be pilots, we may be surgeons, dentists, whatever, not all of us are rock solid, perfect, ideal. And when you grow up, let's say, with a father who's maybe too good to be true, which can happen. I mean, there are some people who are too good to be true, whatever, it happens. Maybe the daughters, they sort of assume they want to see their father and their husband, and they sort of assume that he's just as good, and maybe hold that high standard, And the fact is that that's kind of a narcissistic dynamic, because some people can meet that standard, but most people probably cannot, And so there's that tension between the ideal of how a person should be versus the reality of how a person really is. Okay. And in reality, even though you are a pilot, there are pilots, and we've seen them. We've seen examples who could be tortured in Vietnamese prison camps, right? And even after years and years of being tortured and getting sick and almost dying in the prison camp, they still maintain some kind of incredible integrity, and they survive the prison camp, and they never lose their integrity, But we're not all superheroes like that, right? And some people, even though they're airline captains, if you put enough pressure on them, and even though they're excellent at their job, if they are under too much pressure to live up to a standard, and if that standard requires so much, I guess it takes so much out of you, to maintain, like say a house. I'm sure they're living in a house that was probably 8 times, 10 times more or maybe even 20 times more expensive than the house that they grew up in, right? A lot of us grew up in houses that cost $60,000. You know what I mean? And to be living in a $1.2 million house, and with a wife that maybe expects you to be really just a perfect person, essentially, with children, and trying to live up to that standard, it can wear on a person, And even though you might be an airline pilot, you may have something deep inside where you don't really appreciate deep down inside. It's too much of a strain to not just be yourself, but to be stretched up into like this ideal, and to have to hold this more ideal identity, as opposed to just being who you are, combined with the pressures of being a pilot, So I guess, I'm going to go ahead and assume that Joseph Emerson is not himself a narcissist. No way. No, he's very, very healthy guy, and probably a pretty good pilot, probably a pretty good person, probably has no real mental illness. Okay, so this is not one's individual mental illness. What this is this is a psychotic breakdown as the result of circumstances, right? Economic, relationship. Maybe the wife is just a little more on the spectrum towards wanting to see her husband as an ideal person. So maybe slowly over time, the husband starts to feel like his wife doesn't even know him as he really is. Okay. She only knows me as a superstar, and after a while, that can leave a person feeling kind of empty and lonely. And then you feel like the only way that you count in the world is by meeting this ideal standard, and you start to become alienated from your own true self. Okay. And you feel like you're not even yourself. And I'm going to throw in one other observation. Okay. Why is it that 2 days after his last flight, okay, 2 days after his last flight as a captain flying the plane, okay, so why is it that it was 2 days after he last piloted a plane, okay, that Joseph Emerson is coming back from Seattle to his home in the San Francisco Bay Area? What was he doing for 2 days? I mean, was there some problem in the marriage where he was away for a couple of days? Are there some issues that maybe he was feeling under a lot of stress, and maybe he had friends up in Seattle who were going to hook him up with magic mushrooms? I mean, who are the people that hooked him up with these mushrooms? Was he having, I'm not going to say having disloyal, like say an affair with somebody else. Maybe it was just friends. But was he hanging out with like people away from the family that were giving him the support, and maybe treating him as just a regular person versus his wife that treated him as like this ideal superstar? I have no idea. Maybe he was up in Seattle maybe to do something with his job. Maybe he had a training or something. I have no idea. But he said that we understood that his last flight as a captain, where he was actually piloting, was 48 hours prior to this, or it was even more than that. I think it was like Thursday to Sunday, right? So it was like several days prior to this Sunday incident with Horizon Air, right? But he didn't take the magic mushrooms until 2 days prior. Well, was he in Seattle when he took the mushrooms? In other words, away from his home? So does he have friends over there in Seattle that obviously they're not airline people, right? Because airline people, if they knew, or let's say they're not pilot people, they might, maybe it's a flight attendant who maybe is cool with him, is not going to talk about it to the airline. But he has people outside the aviation community, like say the pilot community, because no pilot's going to give him mushrooms. So he must have some other life, like some other friend group or whatever, because I don't think he's going to randomly buy mushrooms from some stranger. He's not that crazy. So maybe what's going on is that this pressure maybe that he's living under, maybe it is partly a little bit the family, where he feels like he has to seek friendships outside of the family. I mean, I'm just trying to understand why he would be getting the magic mushrooms. He would have to feel a lot of trust and confidence. So he must have some friendship. And I don't know that that's a friendship, I don't think, that his wife would approve of, right? So you wonder if maybe he's got a little satellite social life where that's like his escape from, let's say, a family that holds him to a very high standard, and maybe he's starting to develop like escapist relationships with other people. And so my question is then, maybe there's pressure at home to live up to this very high standard, and maybe he sort of seeks outside the family, like people that understand him more as a real person, and that he's living with this strain of having to live up to this unrealistic standard at home, and then seeking, let's say, people that understand him outside the family, but then that's just going to put more pressure on him. And then maybe he regretted taking the magic mushrooms. Maybe he regrets and has, guilt feelings about having friendships that his wife might not approve of. I don't know, but, I think it's worth looking into that as a possibility, right? That if your life situation at home, if your home situation, if your economic situation is inherently narcissistic, in other words, if you're living at home under the narcissistic pressure to sort of live up to an ideal that's not who you really are. Okay, and how many of us actually live under that pressure? That's not a narcissism to feel bad about. That's the narcissism of just lifestyle and economics, right? That's just young people who are successful. They live under that narcissistic pressure, right? And some handle it better than other people, right? But I just wonder if maybe there was maybe something going on in the family where this guy feels alone in his own family, right? Because of narcissistic issues, and that maybe that slowly is leading him to want to seek, validation outside the family, maybe. right? But it had to get to a pretty bad point for him to want to take psychedelic mushrooms, because for an airline captain, that's a very destructive thing to do. Okay, because that basically that disqualifies you from even having your career. Okay, and it puts you at risk of hurting passengers, because by taking the mushrooms, he could trigger psychiatric problems that might permanently impair his ability to safely carry passengers. So he committed a very destructive act by taking those mushrooms. And so I want to suggest that this guy was very desperate even before he took the mushrooms. Okay, he got to a place where it's not fair to say this is just depression. Depression is to understate it. This guy was desperate. This guy was desperate. So I'm going to assume that it wasn't just one thing. There may be some issues of his career, coming from the Airbuses to the Boeings. I mean, that's stressful. Um, Maybe just living up to the standard of Alaska Airlines, because being part of an airline, you have to live up to a standard that's kind of unreal, kind of ideal. But then to come home and have the same pressure, where even at home you feel like you have to live up to a very high standard, and there's just no room just to be yourself, and so I'm sure maybe a lot of pilots experience maybe that pressure, and I would think that for somebody who has to live with that pressure as a pilot, where at work you have to be an ideal person. At the very least, at home, hopefully you have people that know you as you are and not as a superstar, ideal that's going to leave everybody feeling very lonely. You know, um, Even if people see, let's say, if they see you as being a superstar, it's nice to know that they can also see you as just a regular person. Because if they can't see you as a regular person, the part of you that is just who you are, you're going to feel like nobody recognizes you because they only see you as the superstar, you know? So I don't know. I mean, I would think that, you know, we may want to consider that this guy doesn't really have himself any real mental issues, but that maybe his circumstances, the combination of his job, his relationship, his economic situation, right? His economic commitments, his economic obligations, his family, all these things may have accumulated a level of pressure where he felt like he wasn't really recognized as who he was. He was seen as the superstar father, the superstar husband, and that left the true Joseph Emerson sort of without any recognition, not even at work, because at work you have to sort of be, you have to sort of be performing as a pilot, right? It's not really you yourself, so that just didn't leave a lot of room for him to be himself or to be recognized as he really was. And so, different people handle that differently, but I would think that a lot of pilots, hopefully at home, they can sort of shut off the work and just be known as who they are, and they don't have to be seen as a superstar, you know. And the final thing I want to say is that for anybody who has a spouse or a father who does something terrible, even if it's killing somebody, if I had a father, let's say, who killed somebody, I would not say, oh, my father was evil. That wasn't my father. I would say, look, it's ugly what happened. Okay. I don't like what happened. I think it's terrible what happened. Okay. But the bottom line is we are humans and my father's a human and something happened to him. Okay. Maybe we as a family did not recognize the signs, or we didn't appreciate my father's weakness. Okay. And he ended up doing something that was very terrible. But that's what humans can do when the pressure goes way too far, and maybe we as a family didn't appreciate. Maybe we thought my father was a superhuman, whatever. I'm just using that as an example. If you have a family member who does something terrible, like say if my brother does something terrible, hopefully I as a family member can say, yeah, it's terrible what he did, but that's my brother. Okay, it's not a stranger, and any human potentially can do ugly things if let's say the family doesn't realize the warning signs, and if those signs go ignored and a person lives under pressure for too long, ugly things can happen, and hopefully we can all learn from this. So if I was Joseph Emerson's wife, hopefully I could get to the point where I could say, look, I don't like what he did, but that's my husband. Okay, that's a human. He's not a superhuman. Maybe sometimes I wanted him to be a superhuman, but I realize he's just a human. Okay, and that humans in the wrong place at the wrong time under too much pressure, that's unfortunately, these ugly things can happen, but that's still my husband. And hopefully people can understand and learn from this, and we can all learn from this. And of course I'm sorry about it and I'm embarrassed about it, but that is my husband, as opposed to saying that was not my husband. You know what I mean? So I don't know, just some ideas, but I would think for any young pilots out there, the problem is that nowadays With the pilot shortage, airlines are having to increase salaries a lot, and so people are looking at airline pilot as being a very high paying job. And I just caution families, if somebody becomes a pilot in the family, to understand that they're just human beings, and also, even if you're making temporarily a lot of money, you don't have to buy the most expensive house or live in the most expensive city. You don't have to, because you never know. There could be, at any point, somebody can lose their medical certificate, or they could become, just physically or psychologically disqualified, or they could decide to quit the career, you know? So, the pilot career doesn't last forever. A lot of pilots end up leaving aviation before they turn 65. And so maybe, at the very least, just be careful that even though you're making a lot of money, you don't have to like leverage it and just commit it all into an expensive house and live under pressure. You can still live sort of a regular life, and just try to remember that even though pilots are very special people, they're still people. You don't have to impose the pressure on a loved one who is a pilot, this pressure of being a superhuman. They get enough of that at work. Maybe home is the place to come home where you're just a person. And otherwise we're going to impose a lot of narcissistic pressure. And the same if your family member is a surgeon, or a successful attorney or whatever. They can be Superman at work. When they come home, it's good for them just to be people, and it's good for them too, to take away some of that narcissistic pressure. So anyway, just some ideas. I personally wish the best for Joseph Emerson. He has probably ruined his career as a pilot, but hopefully, I would hope at the best, he could become, like, say, a voice, like a spokesperson for people who ignore mental health in aviation, because I think he cannot be the only one. He cannot be the only young person in their 40s who is over leveraged with their house situation, with their family situation, who's trying to live up to that superhuman standard. And there's got to be others out there living with similar pressures, and we've seen it. We've seen a pilot for Southwest Airlines who took off his clothes and masturbated and watched pornography with a female first officer, co-pilot. Okay, I mean, that is not the behavior of a sane person, right? So, there's got to be other pilots. There's that one United captain who took a hatchet and started wailing on a security gate in Denver. That was caught on camera. So pilots, some pilots can't control their drinking, and they show up with a blood alcohol level, to fly an airplane. So, Joseph Emerson's not the only one. And hopefully, Joseph can at least become a spokesperson and maybe be very open, maybe write a book, maybe do a documentary talking about, the realities of being a regular person in a situation at work where you're supposed to be superhuman, and also then at home where maybe accidentally, the family holds him out to be a superstar when he needs a family maybe that just realizes he's just a regular guy, and how dangerous that can be. So, narcissism can show up in different ways. It doesn't have to be the personality disorder. It can be the actual circumstances, the structural economic circumstances of a family dynamic. It can be the expectations that a spouse has on the other spouse. So, the dynamic of narcissism is something that can cause a strain almost anywhere. And I think, hopefully, Joseph Emerson can become sort of a spokesperson for how he got in this situation, to spread the word and maybe help other people learn from it and prevent this from happening to other pilots and other professionals. So anyway, I wish the best to them. And I mean no disrespect to his wife. Okay, I'm making honest observations, honest speculations. And I don't mean it to put anybody down. The best, all I wish for that family, for the wife, for Joseph, is just that they move on and find a better place, and not to be too wounded by this. There's always a good way to come out of any bad situation. And if it can result in other people learning, then in the end, it's a positive thing. So anyway, just wishing them the best, and thanks for watching.